Hello everyone, my name is Alex and today we will be looking at something very useful in programming called arrays. Arrays are present in mostly any type of programming language and are very useful when we want to handle, for example, a collection of values inside a unique variable. To define an array with a fixed size, that is what we're going to look now, it can be done with this very simple command. We will say, for example, dim to define a new variable. We'll call it, for example, my array. And here we specify the dimension. So in our case, let's say we want to hold, like, for example, 20 values. You will write here 19. Why? Because all arrays start at 0. And if I want to hold a total of 20 values, I grow from 0 to 19. And then we define whatever type of data is going to be stored in each entry of this array. For example, let's say we're going to store a string. We're going to store strings in each position, okay? If we now execute this and we put here a breakpoint, you will see that when we look at our variable myArray, it says string from 0 to 19, and here you have all the positions, you see? So here we have defined a very basic array. If we, for example, want to set a value to this array, we can do array 0 equals something, and we can do, for example, in the position 11, hello, or something like that, and in the position 17, something else, okay? And if we now execute this, you can see that here we have the values that we just defined in the positions of the array. So as you can see, this can have a very high potential and you can do lots of things. So maybe now instead of managing strings, we want to manage, for example, integers. Okay. And if we now try to execute this, we'll get this error where it says that the types don't match. What does this mean? It means that we are generating an array which is expecting only integers, and we are trying to define a string into one of the positions. So bear that in mind when trying to edit things in an array. So if we now change this, for example, to 30 or 70 or 120, oops, 120 here, you can see that with numbers it works more or less the same. If you don't define anything in a string, you will have an empty string. And if you don't define anything in an array that is of integer type, you get just the 0 value in the positions where you don't define anything. Okay? Imagine now that we want to store multiple things in our array, not only integers, but we want to store, for example, integers and strings and other stuff. We can do this by just changing this to variant. Now it will accept anything. Okay. As you can see, in this type of array, instead of putting a 0 or an empty string in the positions where where nothing has been defined, it just returns empty, or what is also known in Visual Basic as a null value. If you now, for example, want to start an array at an index of 1, because you feel, for example, more comfortable working with arrays that start at 1, there are two ways that you can do this. One of them will be to tell Excel to explicitly start all arrays at a base of 1. This has to be defined outside any subroutine or function and will affect during all the code execution all the arrays that you define. So bear that in mind. So now we want this array to hold 20 values. We need to change this to 20 because now it will go from 1 to 20. And also you have to take into account that because now our array starts at an index of 1, this should give us an error. And as you can see, it does, because it says that we are out of the interval of the array. If we now extend this, you can see it says it's a variant from 1 to 20. And it goes from my array 1 to my array 20. So now we need to change this for this to work. If you are smart enough, maybe you can use arrays combined with other things that we have learned up until now. Like for example, a for loop. We can say for I equals 1 to 20, next y, and we say my array y, and we provide it with any value, like for example, I don't know, 3 times y, let's say this. And if we now execute this, we should have our array filled with random numbers depending on this operation. Okay? So as you can see, we can do this little trick of using a for with an array. The other way to define how we want our array to start and where to end, instead of using option base 1, because this can affect all arrays, we can delete this and we can say that we want our array to go from 1 to 20. We now execute this, you can see that it goes from 1 to 20. Also, instead of always having to memorize where your array starts and where your array ends, you can do like this. You can say lower bound, and you have to tell it the array, in this case is my array, to the upper bound of my array. So this value will return the lower bound of the array, that in this case is 1, and the upper bound of the array, which in this case is 20. As you can see, we get the exact same result. Also, you don't have to start at a value of 1 or 0. You can start at any value that you want. Take that into account. So now we go from 8 to 20. And as you can see, we go from 8 to 20. Very easy. So, okay, to summarize, we have learned today the basics of the arrays. In this case, now you should know how to define a one-dimensional array, because it's what we've been working with, because we're basically defining an array with one dimension. That's kind of a list. And yeah, in the following videos, we will be looking more in depth at things that you can do with arrays, like for example, how to define a multi-dimensional array, and how to define an array with not a specific dimension. In this case, we're giving it a fixed dimension from 8 to 20. But for example, we could create one that will grow dynamically depending on the things that we need to include in it. And those are things that, yeah, we will be seeing in the following videos.